Hello, everyone. You are being recorded.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us. My name is María del Mar Piedrabuena, and I'm the co-publisher of Tu Prensa Local, the leading Spanish news site on the eastern of Long Island. I'm also your moderator today. Welcome. Juliana Holguín, from my co-publisher, is also here today. She will be covering the story, so please check out tuprensalocal.com to read her story later this week. Before I introduce our panel, I want to start by thanking Ola of Eastern Long Island for collaborating with us on this important discussion, as well as LTV Studios for hosting us. Today, we will be having a moderated conversation with our panelists. Audience members will be able to ask questions at the end as well. And we will have cards distributed where you can write down any questions that you may have. So please see someone from our team for that. I also want to let everyone know that there is interpretation available, and that this discussion will be shown later on Facebook, as well as YouTube in Spanish and English, on Ola's Facebook in Spanish and English. So our topic today will center around best practices to support child victims of sexual assault on the East End. Our panelists include Veronica Orellana, an ally and sister of a survivor of sexual abuse, a survivor who is here with us today as well, Minerva Perez, Executive Director of Ola of Eastern Long Island, Kate Morales, Safe Administrative Manager at ECLI-Vibes, and Amanda Burke, Suffolk County District Attorney's Office Deputy Bureau Chief and Child Abuse and Domestic Violence Unit Chief. Welcome. And thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So what is sexual assault? Sexual assault is defined as any sexual activity between adults and minors, or between two minors when one forces it on the other. This includes sexual touching and non-touching acts. This intentional act of violence against a child is a deeply traumatic experience and is meant to harm, demean, and silence those against whom it's perpetrated. Although the real prevalence of child sexual assault is not entirely known because of many factors, many times that assault is also not disclosed or reported. But research tells us that youths have much higher rates of sexual assault victimization than adults. At least 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men were sexually abused or assaulted before the age of 18, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Today, we will be breaking down the process of what happens right now, from when a child decides to speak out all the way to court and beyond. How can we best support that child? When and how do institutions step in? What are the specific things that can make this process better? So we remember that at the center of it all, there's a child. And how we can ensure, and this is, I think, the most critical and crucial part, that going through this process will contribute to the child's healing. Mm-hmm. So my first question is going to go to the survivor and the ally, who are in a different room. And I just want to ask them if they're comfortable speaking about their experiences, first of all, and if they are comfortable, if they can share a little bit about it.
Are we asking the survivor first?
Yes.
So we're clear?
Yes, okay. I'm going to ask the survivor first, and then the ally, please.
Yes, I'm confident sharing my story.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here today and being brave to do this. So can you tell us a little bit about, the key points of your story? How did you feel supported? When did you not feel supported? And what you wanted to tell us?
Well, when I was first victimized and I started thinking of how I should speak up, obviously the first person I didn't go to was my family, because the person that I was getting victimized by was a family member. So I went to schools first, and when I went to family, they didn't believe me. So that already brought me down, and I tried speaking of it, but the days kept going, they saw that I kept seeing things, my family, and they would start slowly believing me, but obviously they didn't believe me at first, which really hurt me the most. And it still kind of bothers me throughout this growing up. But yeah.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. We really appreciate that. So was the person that committed this horrible thing close to you?
He was my mother's brother, meaning he was my uncle.
Okay. So during this time, when this happened, what kind of support did you receive when at first you were not believed by your family?
The people that didn't believe me were my parents, and then the only person that was there by my side was my aunt.
Okay.
So her support was really important to me.
Okay, so before going to our ally, I just wanted to ask our panel, is this common? Is this something common where victims are not believed in the beginning by their families? Minerva?
Yes. So we have many experiences where a child victim, we might learn through a relative, an aunt, or a friend, and oftentimes we've accompanied them even to have these conversations with law enforcement if they felt that they couldn't even go to their parent at that point. But honestly, we've heard that a lot, and what we're trying to do is really make sure that parents and adults have a better understanding to see this as critical, that they're supporting the child, and that even though they're going to have a lot of fear around what might be happening or the unknowns, this could be a relative, could be a person that you love in your family, but that you have to take a look at this from the perspective of child, and that we're still there as an organization to help a family through this process, but not at the expense of the child.
Okay. Kate?
So in my experience, it's very common for family members not to believe the child. Denial's like one of our most powerful emotions, and there's a multitude of reasons for not wanting to believe the child. But I think that it's, just key to remember that children do not lie about these things. They don't usually even have knowledge about sexual activity. So it's very important to believe a child when they speak up.
Thank you. So my next question will be to our ally. Veronica, is this also the case for your sister? Was this also the case for your sister? Was she believed when she spoke up?
Yes, when she told us, I didn't believe it. For me, it was really difficult, especially because the assaultant was my ex-husband, the father of my two children. So I thought that person, to think that person could have harmed her was very difficult for me. But immediately I said to myself, my sister is not making this up, that this is not a false story from her. And then I actually looked for help with Ola, and they helped me to understand and to be able to believe it and to actually overcome what was going on. So I think that the aggressors know that if the victims speak out to their families are not going to believe it. And then they actually threaten, and they said, if you tell somebody, they're not going to believe you. And that's what that person used to tell my sister, and that was her fear. And that's why she stayed silent for many years.
Right. And that silence is precisely what makes everything worse, right? So during this critical time, how can we best support these children so they feel that they want to come forward? As agencies, as organizations, what are you doing to ensure that? Amanda?
Well, we have, at the district attorney's office, we have advocates that work directly with the children every time they have to come into court. They're wonderful. Most of them are bilingual, so that they're able to speak with and interact with the child in their native language if it's not English. We have assistant district attorneys that are specially trained to work with children in a child-friendly environment. So our office has rooms that are designed to be comfortable for children. We have a facility dog in the bureau, the Child Abuse and Domestic Violence Bureau, which is, that dog is specially trained to be a source of comfort for children who are going through a traumatic event. He might lay there with the child while they pet him. He might play with the child to help them release some of that nervous energy. But the purpose is to make the child feel as comfortable in a sort of foreign environment that the courthouse is as we possibly can. We will meet with the child as many times as we need to meet with the child in order to make sure that the child feels comfortable, that we build a rapport with them, that we're not asking them to speak to us about the most horrific thing that's ever happened to them without first feeling comfortable with the ADA that they're speaking with. So the ADAs that work with these child victims are very well trained to do so, and that really helps to set the child at ease when they come in to our office. And there's not going to be any part of the process that that child is not prepared for. So moving forward, as they move through the process, everything will be explained to them. An advocate will be there with them every step of the way, and the ADA will make sure, and when I say ADA, I mean the assistant district attorney, will make sure that the child is prepared for what the next step is.
Okay, so just a couple of things. One is that, can you please define what is a child advocate? If there is a Spanish-speaking one here on the East End, does that child advocate and the what you just described, that rapport, that trust that is trying to be built, is that from the moment, does it happen from the moment the child first reports? Because I know that we're speaking about, that first establishing trust, but are you stepping in, to create that bond with that child? Because of course this is going to be a process, and I don't know if that process has been explained to that child. So when does the DA step in?
Sure. So the DA steps in typically after an arrest has been made. So a perpetrator has been arrested and charged with the sexual abuse of the child. And that's typically when the DA becomes involved. However, there are cases where the ADA might become involved earlier on if needed, prior to arrest. But if there is an arrest made and the district attorney becomes involved, the ADA will meet with the child. The bureau that I work in is in Riverhead. So no matter where on Long Island, or where in Suffolk County the abuse occurred, the crime would be prosecuted in Riverhead, because that's where the court is that handles child sexual abuse, and that's where our bureau is. So right from the very inception, after the arrest happens, the ADA that's handling the case will meet with the child with an advocate. The advocate works for the district attorney's office, and the advocates that are working in the Child Abuse and Domestic Violence Bureau have been there for a while and have been working exclusively with these types of cases. So they're very familiar with the process that the children have to go through.
But just to clarify, so this child's advocate is not with the child until after the arrest?
For the district attorney's office, that's correct.
Okay.
Typically prior to the arrest being made, when the district attorney's office becomes involved, outside agencies such as OLA would be working with the child. And they very often, and Minerva can speak to this better, but they would also potentially continue to work with the child. But within our office, when an arrest has been made and there is a prosecution, we have our own in-house child advocates that will be with the child every step of the way, including if the child needs to testify in any kind of proceeding.
So Minerva, I just wanted to clarify this further because, so if we're talking about trust, right, and building this relationship with this child that is at the center of it all, and that we really needs our support. So if a child's advocate only steps in after the arrest, is that something that is normal? It's too late? It's late in the process? Should that advocate step in further? What is the view in our organization?
Sure, I'd love to give my perspective on that, and then also hand it over to Kate as well from Vibes ECLI. What we are seeing, because we're in this East End region, is that we do have a number of police departments and doing great work, but all slightly siloed. So we've got 10 police departments. So what we've been looking at and developing some conversations around the topic of how might we create best practices that allow for an advocate or members of a multidisciplinary team to be involved, not to be sharing confidentiality, about it from this child, but at least be involved police department by police department, so that we can kind of boil down what our responses are and how we respond, so that the child has a better chance of having, and the family potentially, having support throughout that very beginning part of that process. Because they might walk through the door, sit down with law enforcement and decide that it's too scary, they don't want to do anything about it. Ultimately, that could be their prerogative. No one forces them, But at the same time, for them to have that sort of support along the way, if that's so even if we're not talking about something like a rape, so we're not talking about a sane center or a sane nurse, but we're talking about forcible touching or another type of sexual abuse that is just as devastating to a child in many instances, is that how do we have the kind of support system there for that child the minute they come forward? Off that first minute is oftentimes with an adult, a family member, a friend, maybe at school. And then after that, if that does proceed to coming and sitting down with law enforcement in that moment, what kind of support can exist there just in the telling of that story and just in the processing of that, how we record even the fact that we had that conversation, because across multiple police departments, not everyone is recording that fact that conversation happened in the same way. So when we foil for results of the East End law enforcement, we might get some law enforcement agencies saying they had X amount of people reporting child sexual assault, and in others, 0. What we saw across the East End of Long Island was that the overall number was about 1% of the national average, which doesn't make a lot of sense. I think that was from the year of 2019 to 2022. So what we need to look at, or what OLA is hoping to do by having multiple conversations and collaborations, is to look at how do we take the best practices of all of our East End law enforcement and what the DA is seeing and what other advocacy organizations are seeing, and really craft best practices that can support children the way they truly need to be supported in and with their voices out front during this very difficult time. Two different things that I want to say very quickly, because the first question you had is how do we support? One way that OLA is supporting is through an initiative that we called that we have Youth Connect, and it's not just for this, but it does allow any child, middle school, high schooler, to have our number, which is 631-810-9010, 810-9010, to be able to text anonymously, fully anonymously, about anything that they're going through. If they are, and they have texted us about instances of sexual assault and sexual abuse, we're able, in the way that they at first want that information, to let them know a little bit about next steps of that process, just to get them to have the support, first of all, to be safe, and second of all, to kind of figure out the best ways to get that support to come forward. At least it's an avenue, because oftentimes no one wants to come forward at all. So that's one way. And then the other way is by having these very important relationships with local law enforcement and the DA and other nonprofits that do this work, to be able to put our arms around and truly support this child, and oftentimes the family and or the allies that are coming forward with them.
Right. So
Sure, from my perspective, it's really all about messaging and letting that child know that they're safe. We provide SANE exams initially for the child who's been a victim of some kind of sexual assault. And the minute that we meet with them in the emergency room, we do have an advocate present. And we let them know, of course, that they're safe. We call CPS if it's warranted, and we let them know that we're not going to further traumatize them in any way. We do not ask them, questions about the event. We make sure, in conjunction with law enforcement, that they're only sharing their story once with a trained forensic interviewer. We really are just going to reassure them. We are going to make sure that overall they are healthy and that they don't have any pain. And if anyone is harming them, we're gonna keep them safe. And then we connect them with a lot of services through ECLI-Vibes for the follow-up that's so needed.
Right. Right. I just wanted to touch on something that Minerva mentioned, and it's that, yes, we do have about 10 different police departments here on the East End. And we're talking about the importance of that child advocate, from the beginning, being from the organizations or from the DA. But according to the New York State Sexual Assault Victim Bill of Rights, an advocate can accompany survivors while they report what happened to them, right? That trust has been created. You're with them that through that first critical stage, and now they decide they want to report this and they want to enter into a police department and tell their stories. But through our reporting, we have found that sometimes that is not accepted or even allowed for that advocate to go inside with them. So why is there like a difference between one department to another, and why that is not being followed across the board? I don't know who wants to take it.
Amanda?
I can't speak to the practices of the individual police departments. What I can say is that there might be situations where there is a concern that that an advocate's presence would make that advocate a potential witness in the case, which could disrupt the relationship between the child victim and the advocate, if that advocate could potentially be called as a witness at a trial. So that may be a reason that a police agency would suggest that the advocate not be present during the interview. However, I can't speak to the individual practices of the police departments.
Right. Minerva or Kate, what is your experience?
Well, what I want to point out is that they can call ECLI-Vibes Hope Line for an advocate to go with them. They can call OLA, probably. And when that advocate goes to the police department, a big part of their responsibility and our responsibility as an agency is to educate the police department on the importance of allowing an advocate with the person who's reporting. So a lot of that really does come down to education for Suffolk County Police Departments, that it is a right, they are allowed to have their advocate. We advocate many times when police and everyone is together as a team helping a child in the police department, that the advocate should be allowed to stay.
Right. So, Minerva, to answer that question as well, but at the same time, I also wanted to ask you, so having a like a standards, like of best
practice,
practices across the board. Would that help with that process, or?
I mean, I think so. I think our East End Police Departments, there's a lot of great leadership across them. I think that DA being the common denominator in terms of when something gets to the place of prosecution, and it doesn't always for many, many reasons. But I think having that dialogue happen, and also organizations that are working directly with victims and survivors and families and allies, I think that sit down to look at what best practices could exist that are viable, that can make sense for our region. We know what this region is. We know how difficult it is to get around the summer. So having someone from Montauk, we do have a CAC, Child Advocacy Center in Riverhead, but there are going to be times when maybe some of that travel is going to be even more detrimental to a child. But still we have it, which is good, but can we also consider other possible spaces, whether that be in Greenport and in East Hampton? What can we do to look at best practices, that all the gaps that we see that might exist? Language access is always a gap. The point about advocates going in with the child victim is that oftentimes as an advocate, I'm not going to be able to go in with them. What's I think important that we're all bringing up is that if we are all putting our attention on, well, if an advocate is really important to that child, how do we express that to the family and the child, or the family in the instance where the family is not the perpetrator? How do we express that so they can understand, okay, well, maybe there would be an advocate that would make a lot of sense here, because maybe they wouldn't have a ruptured relationship because of the witness example that you gave. So whether that be someone from an organization, whether that be another friend, oftentimes it might be a friend, but again, have that information shared clearly with the child, so that they understand either why that person might not be the best advocate. Is there another advocate that you might want to have in the room with you? At least put some of the power in the hands of the child. And I do know that we're dealing with children that could be 5 years old, that are younger, that might not want that extra pressure of kind of making those decisions. But when we do have children coming forward, maybe they're 16, 17, and they can have some of the power in their hands to say, you can have an advocate with you. These are some concerns that we have about an advocate at this level because of potentially a rupture of a relationship, but you can have another person, at least give them the reasons why. What we often find is that there's not a lot of clarity given to the supporters, the allies, or the victims, so they don't know why these decisions are being made. They can feel very arbitrary, and they can feel that they just have absolutely no voice, which maybe we'll hear from Kate, but I'd love to hear maybe what our ally and our survivor would say about that. But how about the process of really learning what is going on? You didn't wake up in the morning and decide to be a victim of child sexual assault or be the mother of a victim. So how does the information part of that play into your healing and the whole justice process?
Right. So I wanted to ask our survivors and also our ally regarding their experiences. What happened with them, if they feel comfortable to share with us. Did they have an advocate with them at the moment of reporting? And if they didn't, would they feel better if they had? And also another question that I think is very important is, once they decided to report and they went through the process, were they told about the next steps, what this process was going to entail?
So you're starting with the survivor or the ally?
Yes, I'm starting with the survivor.
My advocate was my aunt, so she was definitely not allowed to be with me. And I guess the hardest part about speaking up to was that they didn't take in mind that the person who harmed me was a guy, and they would put me in rooms just only with guys. So that really was also hard, that I couldn't have a woman that I could talk to in there.
Right.
So they didn't put themselves in my shoes, which really bothered me, because they didn't take in account of how I was feeling.
Right. So in a case like that, what can we do to support a child that's actually brave enough to do that, but then encounters that situation? Kate?
So we have to speak up. and we have to advocate for that person who's going to be speaking with the police. And again, it comes back to education. You know, a large majority of our police force are males, but we do encourage in a lot of the child sexual abuse cases that they send a detective that is a woman. And you can request that the detective interviewing is a woman. And I understand that for the survivor, that may be something that is just too far beyond their pale, but the advocate can definitely do that. And that's why it's important to get an advocate involved. If you don't have an advocate with you, you can certainly call, the Hope line, and we can help with that. The Hope line for ECLI-Vibes is 631-360-3630. In fact, if you don't have any support with you at the time that you're trying to report, you can stop, wait until you have that support that you need.
But it looks like in her case, it was her aunt that went with her, and I don't think are they given like an explanation beforehand that you have the right to request a detective who's a female, and that you have all these things that you just mentioned. It looks like from her experience, they just weren't given that option in the beginning. So is there a way of like, or I don't know if it exists right now, is there a process where we, before that child reports, that we give them, their options, what their rights are, and what the process looks like, and all of that? Does that exist right now?
So it definitely does. I don't know what the process for this particular person was, whether they first presented to the police or they first presented to the hospital for example, for a sexual assault SANE exam. But if they do present to the hospital for a SANE exam first, they're automatically connected with ECLI-Vibes, and they are given all this information that they have the right to have an advocate. We have law advocates and we have outreach advocates that will assist them through the entire process. And
is that the case on the East End as well?
Not consistently, and I know Vibes ECLI does come out to the East End as well, but on the East End of Long Island more consistently, because I've been the advocate, and and even having relationships and good relationships with law enforcement, often will not be in a situation where I feel that either I can be in the room if needed, or if this child victim wants me there during that questioning, or that I can say with some, clarity to the child that we'll find a female detective, because the detective might not be trained in forensic exams. That's a very important thing. You want to have someone who knows the training, but even if you have a female detective in the room while the male is also maybe performing and asking those questions, at least that's a better situation than only having men in a room with a young woman who's been victimized. But the reality is that no, that clarity does not come through in any kind of consistent way. The other big piece of this is a lot of the victims that are coming forward, at least the ones that have TOLA, and I'm realizing I'm going to slow down now because our interpreter's probably making faces at me, is that a person might be coming in, a young person, to report something that is, let's say, forcible touching, and there's no witness, there's no evidence, there's no video camera that caught it, and in that critical moment, that's when they can decide that, whoa, this is too difficult. I'm too afraid. I'm going to leave now. Where there are investigative things that can happen, but there's a critical space there where if they're not really guided through, well, these are some things. These are some ways that we can look at it. These are some things for you to know. For that to happen consistently, it is part of the reason why we're kind of calling for and hoping for best practices, because then they're kind of written in front of you. You know what they are. And law enforcement can feel supported by that as well, because they're not in it alone. It's not this one agency doing it, their way, which could be great, but will they be supported by everyone else? So we feel that is something that should be happening consistently, and it doesn't. It doesn't. And if the victim, they shouldn't have to call OLA. They shouldn't have to call Vibes ECLI. That's the reality. if we have best practices that we can all feel are good, and we do the best that we can with them, that means they can walk in off the street to a law enforcement agency or report to their school or report to whomever, and along the way, those best practices will be followed with or without advocates. That's what we need to get to in our communities.
Right. Right. So I want to give an opportunity to our ally, to Veronica, to also answer the question about what was her sister's experience when she first reported. Did she have an advocate with her? And if she didn't, would that made it better? Yes, Veronica.
Yes, when my sister told us, I reached out to Ola because I wanted like some help to find out what to do, because I was in shock. Then what they told me is that the first thing that you have to do is to speak out. Don't be quiet, and to go approach the police, go to the police. And then my sister and my mom went to the police department upstate, because that's where they live. And the police got in touch with the East Hampton Police Department because the crime happened here. And the police gave us the help at that time. Like just say, like for example, to get the statement, my sister's statement, to make the claim, to make it like legal, like what they say. And then when my sister came, my sister went there. I mean, the detective helped us in this case. The only thing is that at that time, what they didn't give us was interpreters. Everything was in English. So for my mom and for me, it was harder for us to understand the details, because my sister, everything, I mean, she spoke in English, and we were asking for interpreters, and then they told us that they didn't have any, that we had to wait or we had to come another day. So in the end, it was my sister herself, the one that was interpreting what she was saying. But that was at first, but then later on, with Ola's help, they helped us, and then they went with us, and it was easier for us to understand more details about the case. So I would like to share the fact that they should have more help in Spanish for Spanish-speaking families that will actually come to court or come to the police with cases like this.
Right. So thank you very much, Veronica. So as from her testimony, what she just said, I think it's clear that having an advocate and having a set of rules and guidelines given prior to everything really would make a difference in terms of language access, and in terms of having maybe a female detective and all of these other items. So I'm gonna go through to the next stage of this process, right? And so let's say that a victim has reported, and I want to touch upon something that you mentioned before, one of you, about forcible touching. And what is forcible touching, if you can define what is forcible touching. I know that recently New York expanded its legal definition of rape to include crimes that various forms of non-consensual sexual contact. So as the DA's representative here, can you please define, first of all, what is forcible touching? What crimes are acts that are a crime, and what is the statute of limitations on those crimes? So I'll explain a little bit about all the new guidelines that we have in the state.
Okay, that's a long discussion. But to go to your first question, forcible touching. So forcible touching is actually a term defined in the law for a specific crime. I don't have the law in front of me, but from memory, the nuts and bolts of it is that it would be the pinching, grabbing, squeezing of intimate body parts, without the consent of the person being touched. And when a person is a child, they can never consent to sexual touching in that way. And in order for it to be forcible touching, my recollection of the statute is that it would need to be done for either to degrade a person potentially, or for the sexual gratification of the person committing the act. I think the important takeaway is not so much the definition of that particular statute as it is to remember that there is a spectrum of sexual abuse. Not every person who has been sexually abused has been raped, or been subjected to sexual intercourse or something along those lines. Sometimes the sexual abuse is touching, grabbing, groping of the intimate parts. And there may be a tendency for individuals who have been sexually abused, especially when they're children, to think that, well, this person didn't have sex with me, or didn't, the abuse that happened to me wasn't that bad. It was just touching. And they sort of may justify the abuse or the behavior of the perpetrator in their mind because it's touching as opposed to intercourse. However, that is also a crime, and that is also something that's not appropriate, not acceptable. It's against the law. And children who have been subjected to that kind of abuse can and should also come forward, because they should not have to live in a home or in any kind of environment where they're being touched inappropriately on their intimate parts.
Right. So, if we know that these crimes are happening, and as you say, sometimes all of that is abuse, right? All of that falls into that spectrum that you just mentioned. How can we best support children who fall into that gray area in that is so confusing, for them first, and even for everyone else, or families, or whoever it is. So how can we best support that child so they go through the process, if that's what they choose, and they feel that they're being heard, they're being seen, right? So Kate, do you want to?
Well, I think you just said it yourself. They need to be heard, and they need to be seen, and they need to be believed. And if the person, their support person, their go-to person is not believing them, they can go to their school, which is an excellent avenue to report something. And then once it's been reported, it's just so important to make sure that we give that messaging in supporting them by letting them know, not your fault. It would never be your fault. We don't want to do any kind of action that would be re-victimizing them or re-traumatizing them. We want to ensure that we are providing them with counseling and follow-up and all the services they may need. And that's going to encompass things they may need in the home. They may need some assistance with bill pays, they may need assistance with food. So if we can provide a lot of those things for them, it's going to come around to support that child, because a parent, their support system, if they're focused on food because they just can't get enough on the table, it makes it very difficult for them to turn around and support that child. And then when the child is in services, it's very important for us to follow up and make sure that they're being seen at, say, the Child Advocacy Center.
Right. Minerva?
Best way to support a child at that stage?
At that stage, yes.
Yeah.
And there's forcible touching, let's say, or someone, who has gone through sexual assault or abuse and is in that spectrum, but is in a very gray area where they don't feel, as Amanda explained, that they have the right or they don't know to go through with it. So how can we support that child to go through the process if they choose so? Because it is a crime, as she mentioned.
It is a crime. As Kate mentioned, very important in that is to not re-victimize the child. Oftentimes, family members, very supportive allies, friends. Sometimes the instinct is to just be so outraged and so hurt, and you're the one crying, and you're the one upset, and you're the one that oftentimes that's not what that child needs. They need you to be calm, to share with them information, share with them options, give them some sort of power in their hands to know. And we're talking about children. So sometimes, if there's going to be a mandated reporter situation, if they go to the school, teenagers often know that, and that's good. You're going to get the support you need, especially if you don't feel that you're going to get full support from your family. You do have to step outside of your family circle sometimes to get the support that you really need and the safety that you need. I think it's this balance point of being able to be there with them, share that information, not re-victimize, empower. And kids that are 12, 13 going through this, they've already been disempowered in the worst possible way you could, even if it's sexual assault, forcible touching. They've already experienced that. The idea that we then oftentimes, or can, I work with families where they want to shelter that child, like sheltering that child and putting them back into this child bubble after they've experienced sexual abuse is a real difficult road to walk. It's like at this point, now we have to look at truth. We have to look at letting this child know what's going on, accountability, process, support. Those things have to be considered. And you don't get to just put everything back in a little bubble and say, oh, but that's a child. I don't want to talk about that. We have seen in our experience that survivors of forcible touching, even if the trusted adults and people in their lives have believed them and gone through whatever stage of the process, even if it doesn't come to a prosecution, maybe for the desire of the child or young person to not go forward, if they were believed and supported and trusted, they're on their way to healing. Those that were told that they don't believe, that we're just going to deal with this ourselves, that it's not that big of a deal, how are you going to ruin the family, how are you going to ruin the life of this person, those folks, even if it was a forcible touching, are not on their way to healing. And we have a survey out, a survivor survey, survivor, or in Spanish, it's sobreviviente, and you could answer those questions that are also rather cathartic to be able to put them somewhere completely anonymous, but taking the respondent through the process from kind of the questions that you're asking, Maria, all the way through. But it's really just to be there and to kind of take yourself out of it, whether you're a parent or an advocate or a friend, and really think about and get help. If you don't know the answers, get help from organizations like Vibes, ECLI, OLA, other organizations, the retreat, and learn the best process forward to support that child.
Right. So, so we know that this is a process that it's so complicated sometimes, right? It's like it's not a straight line from A to B. It looks like it's like a tsunami of information, of confusion, of trauma, of so much. So going through the process, and as you said, it may be an arrestable offense, it may be not an arrestable offense, the DA may build a case or not. What happens, are we keeping track in some way of all those cases that are coming, through our police departments or through our DA's office or wherever? Is there like a database somewhere that we can follow up for these children? Because sometimes it sounds like they fall into like a void, right? So is Amanda?
So most of the sexual abuse cases that we see in the district attorney's office, and it just factually nationwide when it comes to sexual abuse of children, the perpetrator is often a caregiver, a family member, someone within the home. So in those cases, CPS would be involved, and whether there's a prosecution or not, there would be a CPS investigation and CPS involvement when the perpetrator is in a caregiver type of role. So they would probably have, if you're asking for the sort of repository of all of the allegations of child sexual abuse, CPS probably has the largest repository of that information. However, the police departments keep records of reports of sexual abuse. Our office has records of reports of sexual abuse. So I would say that depending on which jurisdiction, if there's a question about whether or not sexual abuse has been reported, obviously it's confidential, but the individual police departments would have a record of whether they've received a report of sexual abuse.
So in our experience in trying to do research for this, we asked that question to police departments, and the answer given was that they don't keep specific track, at least on the East End. I don't know in other jurisdictions, as you said. As to when, it's forcible touching is not an arrestable offense. So we couldn't find like a way to keep, to have information about that specifically. So I don't know if we're not asking the right questions, or you have.
If I may, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So if there's police involvement, the Child Advocacy Center has a wonderful way of tracking the children who have been through the CAC, and whether they've followed up with counseling and all their needs, and they do follow them for an extensive period of time. So they meet monthly and they discuss all the children who have come through and see where they're at in their services and what's needed for follow-up. And law enforcement, CPS, everyone does attend that monthly meeting. So the CAC is not only over in Islip, but it's also in Riverhead. I think we are lacking on the East End, getting that follow-through and tracking people. It becomes very difficult to track people who have not gone through the law enforcement process, people who have been victimized, but we don't have them in a tracking system. We do track them at ECLI-Vibes in our database, just to see who, and we follow up to see who needs support, meetings, etc. But I'm certain there's still, a host of people that we're missing.
Minerva?
I think that addressing maybe early on how we can better connect with the acceptance of the victim and the family and all that, but best connect in reasonable and confidential ways to maybe a multidisciplinary team. So at the very onset, the very moment that child is stepping in, that there can be given to that child, and then throughout the process, know that there's a connection point. I think if that's done consistently, at least that can happen at the very beginning. And then as that child and family go through the process, to know that we're continuing to reconnect and just make sure that they have that kind of support. I think sometimes it's difficult because some survivors don't, after they've gotten through it, don't want to keep talking about it. They might pull themselves back, but I think making sure that you're always making access available in real terms. And on the East End of Long Island, we have to be real about what that means with mental health, what that means about transportation, what that means about all of it. We have to be real. What kind of access do people truly have? The other thing that I want to speak to is the keeping of the kind of like data. I've been in the room with victims coming forward, child victims that could be 17, 16, or they could be 21 reporting about something that happened to them when they were younger than 18. So let's say that spectrum. And upon speaking with law enforcement, determining that there isn't a witness, there isn't evidence, this happened a couple of years ago, that child nothing being written down, the child leaves, later on to try to get a police report or an incident report, not even having that, not having a chance to speak out and have that recorded somewhere. And then OLA also foiled for data, specifically asking for suspected sexual assault, child sexual assault, to get the data across the east end of Long Island. The fact that it was so varying, so some departments, I'm not naming any of them, might report for 3 years that there were 26 instances of child sexual assault. One police department reported 0, one reported 2. And these were difficult years, 2019 to 2022. We know that was during COVID. We know that those instances are probably a lot higher. And I'm not faulting law enforcement for people that don't come forward to them, but that gray area is a critical area. When that person is coming in to report, only in rare instances, as Kate has said, if they are absolutely sure that that child is lying, or they're absolutely sure that this 4-year-old is being brought forward because there's a child custody battle and it's 100% clear that there's something that's completely a lie here. Otherwise, it's going to be something that you need to believe and need to take a step as though this is a child victim of sexual assault. And what does that mean? And what does that trigger? That certainly triggers keeping track, even if it's just a piece of paper. Boom, boom. Yes, I had 3 people that came in this week to say. Now, it doesn't mean that they all went and got arrested, that they were able to arrest, that they were able to go to the DA, but that person just coming in to report probable suspected child sexual assault should be something that we're keeping track of, because only then can we start looking at, and that's not even going to give us the right number because we know people aren't going to come forward, but it's a combination of looking at this whole cycle of it. What can we do as advocates? What can we do as family, as friends, as ourselves to stay strong and know what these processes are? But that piece is there's a missing piece there.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, and you mentioned the term multidisciplinary team.
Mm-hmm.
What would that look like in that ideal situation where you have this team in place and for that victim from the beginning, and it goes through the process all the way, to the court, basically. So what?
I'll throw this idea out there, and it's one that we're thinking through, because we don't want to just suddenly have this child victim who wants to be anonymous and doesn't want anyone to know what's going on. Suddenly there's 10 people sitting around saying, "Hey, we're here for you." That's not what we're saying, but is if we have a multidisciplinary team that understands the needs of the East End of Long Island and the needs of our East End law enforcement, because they are independent agencies, is that at least that detective who's taking that initial report has access themselves to that multidisciplinary team, whether that is an immigrant advocate, a child advocate, a SANE nurse, a social worker, a psychologist, the elements that you might want to say, okay, listen, this just walked through the door, and now that detective is going to let that team know this person just reported this. We're starting the process now. That multidisciplinary team knows that, first of all, that's an accountability thing, that there was this report that was made. Where it goes from there, who knows, for different reasons, but that team is there for that officer or detective, and then that detective is able to say, these are some folks that do this work in this area, these are some things that we're going to let you know that you can connect to. But it can go both sides of the street there, so that way, not to have that team jump in and tell that detective what he should be doing, he or she should be doing, but to just sort of exist there for them. I mean, there are ways of creating systems that are going to be supportive and not just slowing down processes or creating a lot more paperwork or having everyone looking over everyone's shoulder. But in a case like this gray area is an area that falls. It falls a lot. I mean, I've been in the room to watch it fall, and I was in the room. So if you come in there on your own without an advocate and you're a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, we need to have best practices established so that we know that support's going to be there, and the support for the officer is going to be there. Because I'll just say this one thing very quickly, is that by working with law enforcement and understanding that they really do want to get the bad guy or bad person, and then oftentimes when they're presented with a scenario that they know and they trust the victim that came in, it was victimized, but they see that, oh my gosh, there's like no way, and this child is, maybe I'm going to re-victimize the child by, arresting, what should I do in this situation? There's a lot on the shoulders of law enforcement, and if they feel like they can't really get that bad person, I'm not saying it always is, but it can be a disincentive because they really want to get the bad person. What we see with our victims and survivors is that just going through the process alone, respectfully, with clarity and information, is part of the healing process, even if it doesn't even get to the DA. It's not only about putting that person behind bars, it's about that entire process is justice for victims and survivors of sexual assault as children. But I think oftentimes law enforcement it's difficult. It's hard because they have kids. They want this person that did this bad thing, but they see in front of them, I don't have enough, But what we want to be able to do with best practices and dialogues like this is to be able to say that whole process is justice. If we can do it consistently with care, with a child-centered focus. So that's something I just wanted to share.
Thank you. No, I just wanted to share. I have a couple more questions, and I know that we're pressured for time. It's almost time. So for Amanda, I wanted to ask you. We know that this, once a case starts, it's a long process. It's not 2 weeks, 6 weeks. It's a long process. Sometimes it takes years, right? So for that amount of time, so what is the DA's role in that process? How much time do you spend with that child, listening to that child, and supporting that child through it? Because we know that sometimes, even regardless of the outcome, you're not going to be spending all this time building this case, and so what is your role?
Well, the role of the prosecutor or the ADA is really to seek justice for the victim in a courtroom. Right. So that might be that the case results in a plea of guilty. That might be that the case goes to trial. But throughout that process, especially in the beginning, the ADA will meet with the child, build a rapport, find out what happened to the child. Most often the case will be presented to the grand jury, which is sort of a process that happens before a case can go to trial, where members of the grand jury will determine whether we have enough evidence to move forward with the case and what the charges should be. So that's after arrest. And during that time, the ADA will spend a lot of time with the child, as will the advocate from our office. The important part of that is that during that initial phase, when the ADA is meeting with the child and the advocate is meeting with the child, the advocate is also developing a rapport with that child. The ADA is taking on the role of the legal part of the case. So many times the advocate from our office will be the person who is communicating with the child when the ADA is not able to. So developing that level of comfort for the child within our office is important, with not just the ADA, but the advocate. And then as the process goes on, our ADAs are really excellent at communicating, letting the child and the family know what's going on with the case. We try to take a step back in the sense that we don't want to be constantly reminding the child of this. We want the child to be able to have the space to heal and to begin that process. And just because the case began doesn't mean that it's going to be over quickly, as you said. So while the case is pending, we are encouraging that child to get help from maybe some in the form of counseling, going to groups that might be helpful, where they can interact with other children who have been through similar experiences. And we try to encourage them to do that, so that when the point comes for trial, they're in a better emotional place and they are feeling stronger and able to endure that process. But the ADA will be there with them through the whole thing, as will the advocate.
Right. Thank you. Minerva?
I was just thinking that I do know that our survivor has gone through this process. It was a long process. There were adjournments, and I know that she had the support of two really amazing female DAs. From my perspective, but I think that maybe she might have something to add on this long process that she had the strength to get through. Okay, wasn't sure. I was just thinking about her.
I wanted to give our survivor and ally an opportunity to speak to the process of going through with the DA's office. Their experiences when they felt best supported throughout that process, and what was their experience like. So I'm gonna ask the survivor to please answer the question first.
Well, during the first incident, it wasn't easy. Well, like I said, because it was mostly talking with guys. even when I said I didn't feel comfortable. But during the second incident, which was a different man, I had two female, believe they were district attorneys. And before even asking me anything, they got to know me better. They asked me questions about my home life and just about school and everything. So I think the second incident, not that I wished it happened, but it did help me just like gain confidence, because they told me, like, they didn't just say, I understand. They shared like experiences that they went through too. And they would tell me like, oh, you're not the only one, like this has happened, like, believe it or not, you're like, it's not easy being like a child and doing this, like there's not that many that do this. So just like them reassuring me that I'll be okay and that it's not my fault was really helpful. And then they allowed me to bring my own dog for that. So they think this second incident, these two district attorneys, these lawyers, just are really like loving and understanding about everything.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I want to go now to Veronica, to our ally. And I know that she has also gone with her sister through the whole process. And so what was your experience like with the process of going through your sister's case, the system? What are your thoughts?
Yes, everything was difficult. But there's always a light at the end, there's hope. During the process, my sister got a lot of support from therapy, from her school. No, they cannot hear me. Oh, yeah. Huh. Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah, okay. During the process, it was difficult, but there were always people that were there to support us. Mostly to my sister, she did get a lot of help from school, she got therapy. What I would like to say is that here in Long Island, when I let the school know, my children's school know what was going on, because my children were also affected by all this, one of the social workers or a school counselor told me that it was very difficult to talk about these issues because she had worked with abused children in the past, and then in the end, to come forward or to talk about it didn't do anything. It was useless. That will actually hurt families, destroy families, and that you don't get anything out of it by saying it. To me, to listen to that answer was really hard. I think that in other circumstances, I will have listened to them and said, well, better I'm not going to do anything and I'm just going to be quiet. Excuse me. But I was brave, and, organizations like OLA told me, you're not supposed to be quiet, you're not supposed to be afraid, and you have to move forward. So these people, these sexual aggressors, can actually be behind bars. So we stop other children from becoming victims in the future. So during the process, I actually met other people. For example, CPS that told me, like, they were kind of like making the problem smaller, telling me maybe that guy fell in love with your sister. Like, there were messages that were at that case, in the case that you're leaving, that they're not good. The opposite, they hurt you. How an adult can fall in love from a 6-year-old child, child. And my experience, I think that even though you're listening to all these comments, even though people that are supposed to be trained for their jobs tell us things like that, we shouldn't give up, because there's other people that will be with us, will support us, and then you have to continue, move ahead, then try to denounce all these cases.
Thank you, Veronica. Thank you very much for sharing that. And you mentioned something very specific. You said that even though it looks like you experienced several instances where your sister didn't feel seen, that you didn't feel heard, she wasn't believed. She pushed through, and she with the support of your support and all the support, was able to keep going with her case. Why and how was she able to do that? In your experience, that drive, that strength to be able to move forward, even though she had gone through, and you had gone through as well, those cases with CPS, and you're the social worker that you just described.
Anna, can I ask maybe that in terms of the microphone situation, maybe if Veronica isn't speaking directly into the mic, but pulling herself a bit back, so we hear a little bit of her audio, but we mostly hear Anna, because we just don't want to miss what she's saying.
Okay. Most of all, I think that the help comes from the household, from the family. It's not easy. It's not a road that you can actually go easily. It's very painful. But in our case, Ola of Eastern Long Island was always there supporting us. During the therapy that we had, I also had to get some therapy. I think that's the most important part that help us overcome it. We're not at 100%. My sister's still not well. It's really hard. But I know that she's going to pull through. I know that she's strong. The fact that she told us all what she had been living through makes her a strong woman. And same way, the families that are going through these, children, adolescents, they have to have the strength to be able to speak up, to be able to say it. And then the people that...
The mic, you're maybe leaning away from the mic or something. We're just not hearing you.
No, actually, we haven't moved.
Got really close.
Okay, then maybe Veronica doesn't have to be, she can literally put her, maybe face the other direction a little bit, like sideways, just because we don't want to lose what Anna is saying, and we know that we're also going to hear Veronica too. Sorry.
Por favor, no hable, no vea el micrófono. Mejor véame a mí. Okay. ¿Puede repetir lo que dijo?
Sí, entonces, lo que decía es...
Yes, what I was saying is that for the family to stay together, to believe, if there's a child or an adolescent that is going through the same thing, to have the strength to be able to speak up. So the abuse can finish, and the people that are actually told, they have to believe right away, and to denounce it right away, that these people are not part of our society anymore.
Thank you. Gracias. Thank you, Veronica. I also want to share I want to ask, our survivor, and this is, a question, my last question to her is, what are the ways that you have experienced where you have felt the most supported, the instances where you have felt the most supported throughout your process?
I'm I'm sorry, can you just repeat that question again?
Yes. What are the ways or the instances where you have felt the most supported during your process? What are the ways that you have felt the most supported?
I definitely, I was going to therapy since middle school, so being with my therapist twice a week, every week, helped me a lot. And then she would just say things and like give me time to relax and even to cry it out. So having a therapist was really supportive, and then having my aunt, my family, once they started believing me, was helpful too, because they saw that all my child energy immediately went away and I wasn't myself anymore. So they would ask me questions like, are you okay? Like, let's have a conversation. We'd have like a family prayer time, going out, helping get my child, helping bring my inner child out again, which is really supportive. And even my older sister, at first, she didn't fully believe me, but she started understanding me. And I think this was the mostly important person that I wanted to believe, was like, I really wanted my older sister to believe me, because her and I are very close. We share everything. So when she didn't believe me for the first time, I felt hurt. But as I started speaking up more to her and explaining everything that happened, she would take me out. She would take me to the park and stuff. And just like in school, when we were in school together, she would be like, you can go to your nurse, because I know that she knew that I was really close with my nurse, the school nurse. And she would go with me to talk. I guess just having my family members was really supportive, and especially my therapist, who has been there for years, ever since, I think she's been with me since I was 11, and still to now she's with me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. So I have one final question for our panel. And so from our conversation today, which has been difficult but important, I believe, I think a trauma-informed, victim-centered approach, right, to sexual assault in minors is definitely, in a multidisciplinary way, it's definitely the answer, I hope, but at least a better approach or a best practice to this. So what is the one thing you want the audience to take away as a result of this discussion? So we're going to go through each one of you. The one thing the audience, we want the audience to know about this discussion. Amanda, I'm going to start with you.
I think that the most important thing is that children know that and understand that if they come forward to law enforcement, they will be believed. They might not have the support of their family. They might not have the support even of their own parents. But if they come forward to law enforcement, we will do everything that we can. And maybe that doesn't mean that there will be a criminal prosecution, but we know that in the district attorney's office that children don't just make up these type of allegations. Most children, I believe that Kate said before, don't even have a frame of reference to make these kinds of things up. So if they come forward, we believe them. And that's I think important for them to know.
Thank you. Kate?
For me, the most important thing would be to let children know they are not alone and that there is help. We have ways of connecting them with agencies, working out, travel, whatever is needed, we're going to assist them. And then the other thing, on the other half of just helping support these children, is to educate more and get more of a best practice that we can roll out to all of the East End police departments and establish a database for trying to keep track of the victims that come forward.
Thank you. Minerva?
Well, the first thing I'll say is to those folks that could be watching this who are living through this right now, or have lived through it as children, to believe in yourself and to find the support that you can around you if you don't feel that you can come directly on your own to a place of authority or law enforcement. Find an ally, a friend that can believe you and be with you, to understand the value that you have in this world, that you are valued more than anything in the world, and that these things that you did not deserve any of these things that may have happened to you, and that you are strong. You are extremely strong. No matter what you do next, you're strong, and you will survive this. For anyone else who might be an ally or a parent, please believe the people when they come forward, as we're hearing. Experts understand that these are not lies. They're not lying. It is a painful thing to be able to speak about these things. Our survivor went through a 2-year legal process. She stayed with it the entire time, one of the hardest thing in the world to go through, and she stuck with it. These are not children that are lying. You need to believe them and honor them and hold them close and trust them and support them. And it's going to be difficult, but that's what you need to do. So that's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Minerva. So I just want to thank our panelists. I want to thank most especially our survivor and our ally for sharing their stories, for being here with us today and being brave to talk about their experiences and to tell them that we stand with them and we believe them. So thank you very much. Again, I'm Maria Piedrabuena from Tu Prensa Local. This story will be available on tuprensalocal.com. We're going to do a story about the forum and the key points that we discussed today. We're also going to have on YouTube, Ola's YouTube and Ola's Facebook page, the recording of this entire discussion. So thank you very much, and see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.